The dried meat from Mesa provisions fed the valley for 3 consecutive winters, and by the 4th, it was being freighted as far as Denver. But this is where it started, October 17, 1882. The day of the public auction on the steps of the land office. The laughter was the first thing. It wasn't a sudden burst but a low rumble that grew as the auctioneer, a man named Peters with a sweat-stained hat, pointed a thick finger at the 2 figures standing beside the bottom step. "Sold, then," he announced, his voice thick with disbelief that doubled as amusement. "To the Holloway sisters, for the sum of $11. 160 acres of Section 24, known locally as Devil's Mesa. The crowd, mostly men who had come to watch the foreclosure of the Holloway farm finalized, shifted its weight. $11. It was the price of a bad horse. Mr. Alastair Finch, the man who had acquired their father's fertile bottomland for pennies on the dollar just an hour before, adjusted the brim of his fine felt hat. He smiled, not with malice, but with the profound, unassailable confidence of a man who understood the world in terms of tons of hay and heads of cattle. "Well, girls," he said, his voice carrying easily over the dusty quiet. "I wish you luck with your rock garden. Do try not to fall off." The laughter came then, sharp and uncharitable. Martha and Sarah Holloway, 22 years old, stood perfectly still. They were twins, but not identical. Martha was the taller, quieter one, her gaze fixed not on Finch but on the distant, flat-topped silhouette of the land they now owned. Sarah's hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her jaw tight as she stared at the worn toes of her boots. They had $7 left, a half sack of flour, a dozen salted fish, a German shepherd dog named Kaiser, and the clothes they wore. They also possessed their father's survey transit, his tools, and 3 leather-bound journals filled with his precise, elegant script. The journals were the reason for the $11 purchase. The journals were why Martha had not even flinched. The world saw a worthless, sun-baked plateau. Martha, through her father's eyes, saw a fortress. The memory of that laughter was a cold stone in Sarah's stomach as they made the first ascent. It was a 3-mile climb from the valley floor, a punishing track of loose shale and switchbacks. "There's nothing here, Martha," she said, her voice raw with dust and despair. "There is no soil. We can't plant. We can't graze. We'll starve before the first snow." Martha did not answer immediately. She stopped at a rise, unshouldering her pack and letting it fall to the ground. Kaiser, tongue lolling, sat at her feet. She pointed. "Look there. At that fold in the land." The north-facing slope Sarah saw only a shallow depression, a place where the rock face dipped before rising again. It was choked with a tough, grey-green shrubbery she didn't recognize. "It's a ditch," she said. "That's a swale," Martha corrected, her voice even. "Father's notes call it a thermal sink. The cold air settles there. The earth is deeper. And that bush is bitter brush. The deer browse it when nothing else is left." She pulled one of the journals from her pack, its cover worn smooth. She opened it to a page marked with a dried leaf. He wrote it all down. The geology. The way the wind scours the top but leaves the lee side untouched. He said a limitation and an advantage are often the same thing. It depends on what you are trying to do, and what are we trying to do? Sarah's voice was sharp. "We are going to build a house," Martha said, turning a page. "And then we are going to build a business for the next 2 months." They lived under a canvas lean-to. They worked from the first hint of dawn until the last vestige of light faded from the sky. The work was brutal, a relentless assault on the earth. They chose a spot at the base of the swale, where the ground was a mix of dense clay and fragmented rock. It was not a digging of a cellar, it was an excavation. They started by marking out a rectangle, 20 feet by 12, cutting straight into the hillside. The shovels were useless against the compacted earth. They used the heavy pickaxe, taking turns, swinging it until their shoulders screamed and their hands were a mass of blisters. Each strike yielded only a handful of dirt and stone. Kaiser would watch them, a silent, attentive guardian, occasionally whining softly as if to question their sanity. Sarah's doubt was a constant, corrosive presence. "This is a grave, Martha. We're digging our own grave, but Martha worked with a serene, unnerving focus, her movements economical, her gaze distant. She was following a map only she could see, laid out in the pages of her father's third journal. The hole deepened by inches, then feet. They hauled the excavated earth and rock away in wicker baskets, dumping it to form a low, thick wall on the exposed side of their pit. They were not just digging down, they were burrowing in. After 5 feet, they hit a layer of solid rock. Sarah threw her shovel down. "It's over. We can't go through that." Martha ran her hand over the stone. It was shale, layered and brittle. "Get the pry bars and the sledge," she said. Father wrote about this layer. It splits for another week. They fractured and pried up slabs of the dark grey rock. They saved every piece, stacking them meticulously by size. These, Martha explained, would be their walls and their hearth. Samuel, an old trapper who had known their father, found them in the 3rd month. He appeared silently at the edge of their camp, a gaunt figure with a rifle cradled in his arms. He watched them for a full minute before speaking. "Your father told me about this place," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Said a man with the right kind of sense could live up here forever. I see he passed that sense on." He looked at their bleeding hands and the shallow pit. "He also pulled my brother out of a flash flood back in '68. I owe a debt." Samuel stayed for a month. With his help, the pace of the work changed. He showed them how to use leverage to move stones they couldn't lift, how to mix the clay with dry grass to make a crude but effective mortar. Together, they built the interior walls with the flat shale they had excavated, leaving a deep, wide space at the far end. This would be the fireplace and chimney. It was a complex piece of engineering, designed from their father's diagrams. It needed to draw air from a low vent near the floor, pull smoke up through a long, baffled flue that would capture most of the heat, and exhaust it through a stone-lined shaft that terminated 20 feet up the hillside, hidden among a stand of juniper. It was designed not for warmth, but for a constant, cool smoke. The roof was the final, back-breaking piece. They laid thick pine logs, salvaged from a deadfall grove a mile away, across the stone walls. On top of this, they layered hide. Samuel had traded them for some of their salted fish, then a thick coating of their clay-grass mixture, and finally, they covered the entire structure with the earth they had first dug out, creating a living roof of sod that blended almost perfectly into the hillside. From a distance, it was nearly invisible. When it was finished, the interior was a cavern of cool, silent darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and stone. A single wooden door, fashioned from scavenged planks, was the only entrance. There were no windows. In the center of the main room, suspended from the log rafters, were a series of iron hooks and wooden racks. "A smokehouse," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the chamber. It wasn't a question. For the first time, a flicker of understanding crossed her face. "Why would we build a smokehouse before a home?" "This is our home," Martha replied, gesturing to the small alcove they had built to one side, with 2 simple bunks. "And this," she swept her hand towards the racks and the great stone hearth, "this is our future." That first winter, they nearly didn't make it. The money was gone. They lived on what little they could trap and the last of their flour. But they were warm and sheltered in their subterranean dugout. The bitter cold that swept across the valley floor did not touch them. The earth itself was their insulation. Their first venture into business was small. They bought 2 old, tough steers from a rancher on the verge of bankruptcy, trading their father's transit for them. It was everything they had. They butchered the animals themselves, a grim, bloody business that left Sarah pale and shaken. But Martha was methodical. She followed the journal's instructions to the letter, cutting the meat into long, thin strips, curing it in a brine of salt and crushed juniper berries, and then hanging it on the racks in the smokehouse. For 2 weeks, a slow, cool fire of bitter brush smoldered in the stone hearth. The smoke was thin and acrid, filling the chamber with a haze that stung the eyes. The smell permeated their clothes, their hair, the very air they breathed. The final product was not jerky as the valley knew it. It was nearly black, hard as wood, and smelled faintly of resin and the high desert. "Who will eat this?" Sarah asked, holding a piece. It looked inedible. Someone who is hungry enough, Martha said. And someone who knows its worth. They packed the meat into canvas sacks and Martha took their meal down to the town of Prosperity. She went not to the general store, but to the freight office that supplied the mining camps in the high mountains. The foreman laughed at her. But she left a small sack on his desk. A gift, she said. For your longest route. A month later, a rider came up the Mesa. He brought a letter with a cash order for 200 pounds of the meat. The miners, he wrote, claimed it was the only thing that kept them from starving and that it tasted better the longer you chewed it. It did not spoil. It did not mold. It gave a man the strength to work a 12-hour shift in the cold. It was the beginning. By the second year, their operation had grown. They acquired a small herd of rangy cattle, animals Finch and the other ranchers considered cull stock. They grazed them on the sparse grasses of the Mesa top, moving them constantly, never allowing them to strip the land bare as the ranchers did in the valley. They built a second, larger smokehouse, following the same subterranean design. The work was still relentless. But now there was a rhythm to it, a purpose that Sarah finally understood. She managed the accounts, the trading, the logistics of moving hundreds of pounds of cured meat down the treacherous trail. Martha managed the land, the animals, and the precise, alchemical process in the smokehouses. They became a familiar, if strange, sight to the people of Prosperity. Two women, always together, smelling faintly of wood smoke, who spoke little and worked constantly. The mockery had faded into a grudging curiosity. They were no longer the foolish girls who bought a rock pile, they were the Holloway sisters of Devil's Mesa. Alastair Finch watched their slow success with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. He could not comprehend it. He operated on a scale of thousands of acres and hundreds of prime cattle. They operated on a patch of worthless stone with a handful of bony livestock. Yet their name was spoken with a strange respect by the freight drivers and merchants. He decided he needed to know more. He hired a young man, Tom, a drifter with hungry eyes, to do some work for him. "I hear there's a spring up on that Mesa," Finch told him, a casual lie. "Go up there, offer to help the Holloway sisters clear it out. For a share of the water, of course. Just see what it is they're doing." Tom made the climb, leading a pack mule. He found the sisters not by a spring, but by the mouth of their newest excavation. He gave Finch's story. Martha listened without expression. Sarah watched him with open suspicion. "There is no spring," Martha said. "The water we have, we haul from the creek in the valley. We have a cistern. It is ours, but you could use the help," Tom insisted. "I'm a hard worker." Martha looked at his worn-out boots and the lean set of his jaw. "We pay in meat, not coin," she said. 1 day's work for 3 days' food. Tom stayed. He expected to find a secret, a hidden vein of silver, a lost water source. What he found was work. He helped them dig the third smokehouse, his muscles aching with a fatigue he had never known. He watched them tend their animals, doctoring a sick calf with a poultice of herbs Martha gathered from the rocks. He saw them at night, sitting by their small fire, mending their worn clothes by lantern light, speaking in low tones. He saw Martha reading her father's journals, her finger tracing the lines of script. He saw how they shared their food equally, always setting a portion aside for Kaiser first. There was no secret but the work itself. And the knowledge. He was there the day the man came up the trail. A rough-looking stranger who claimed to be a prospector. He asked for water, and Sarah gave him a dipper from their barrel. The man lingered, asking questions. That night, Kaiser began to bark, a low, savage growl directed at the cistern. Tom saw Martha go out, lantern in hand. She knelt by the covered cistern, then came back, her face grim. "He poisoned it," she said quietly. "There's an oil slick on the surface." Sarah's face went white. That was all we had. Without a word, Tom stood up, grabbed his rifle, and slipped out into the darkness. He returned 2 hours later, leading the stranger's horse. He did not have the stranger. "He won't be back," Tom said. He looked at Martha. "Finch sent him. Just like he sent me." He wanted you broken before the dry season really sets in. What do you do when the very person sent to destroy you becomes your most loyal defender? It is a question of character, not of strategy. The sisters did not ask for an oath. They did not demand an explanation. They simply gave Tom a bunk in the new smokehouse and a larger share of the meat. His loyalty was not spoken, it was demonstrated. He worked harder than ever, his silence a testament to a debt he now felt he owed. The sabotage of the cistern was a turning point. It was Finch's first major miscalculation. He had assumed their resources were as fragile as anyone else's. He did not know about the second cistern, a smaller, deeper one, dug into the rock and fed by a clever series of channels that collected the rare runoff, hidden under a thicket of juniper a quarter-mile away. It was another detail from the journals. An emergency reserve. Finch's spy had reported only the main cistern. Finch, believing them without water, waited for them to abandon the Mesa. They did not. Instead, their operation continued without a single visible interruption. The incident solidified the bond between the three of them. Sarah's lingering skepticism of outsiders hardened into a fierce, protective loyalty. Tom, shamed by his original purpose, became their tireless guardian, patrolling the perimeter of their land, his presence a clear warning. It also marked the beginning of the drought. It did not arrive with drama, but with a quiet, relentless absence. The spring rains were light. The summer was a brassy, heat-soaked ordeal. The creek in the valley shrank to a muddy trickle. By autumn, the rich grasslands on Finch Ranch were turning brown and brittle. The cattlemen of prosperity gathered at the general store, their faces etched with worry. No feed, they muttered. Have to sell off half the herd before winter. Won't get a decent price. Finch was there, projecting an aura of calm control. A dry spell is a test, he announced to the room. It culls the weak. Those of us with deep wells and good stock will weather it. He had recently drilled a new, expensive well near his main house. He believed technology and capital were the ultimate insurance. He was wrong. The drought was not a spell, it was a siege. The first winter was hard. The second was brutal. The valley's water table dropped. Finch new well began to bring up sand. His herds, crowded onto his best pastures, stripped them bare and then began to weaken. The price of hay from outside the valley skyrocketed. Finch, trapped by his own scale, was forced to buy it, watching his capital drain away. On the Mesa, it was also hard. The sparse grass was drier than ever. But Martha's grazing strategy paid off. Their small herd, constantly moved, still found enough forage. The bitterbrush thrived. The juniper was unaffected. Their cisterns were low, but held enough. And in their subterranean smokehouses, row upon row of cured meat hung in the cool, dry air. A fortune made of protein and salt, waiting. The first to come for help was the priest. Father Michael made the climb in the spring of the third dry year, his black cassock powdered with dust, his face grim. He did not ask for a handout. He asked to trade. The church had a store of last year's wheat, and he offered it in exchange for meat to feed the families who had lost everything. Martha and Sarah met with him at their small wooden table outside the main dugout. "We do not sell," Martha said. "We trade. For the wheat, you can have £50, and for labor," the priest asked. "The Miller family has nothing left but strong backs for 1 week of labor from 2 men, Sarah replied, now the voice of their commerce. "We will trade £100. They can help us finish the 4th house." That was the beginning of the pilgrimage. Soon, a narrow but steady trail of valley residents began making the arduous trek up to Devil's Mesa. They came with sacks of potatoes, with tools, with bolts of cloth, with promises of future labor. They came for the dark, hard meat that could keep a family from starving. The sisters never turned anyone away, but their terms were absolute. It was always a trade, never charity. It was a transaction of mutual need, preserving the dignity of those who asked for help. Sarah kept the ledger, a meticulous accounting of goods and labor exchanged. The mockery of the land office was a distant echo, replaced by a desperate, grudging respect. Finch watched it all from his porch, his fields turning to dust. He saw the traffic on the trail to the Mesa and his contempt curdled into a furious, obsessive envy. He still did not understand. He saw only that they were profiting from the misery that was ruining him. He decided to compete. If dried meat was what the market wanted, he would provide it. He had the cattle, or what was left of them. He had the men. He ordered his ranch hands to build a smokehouse. They erected a crude wooden shed, a stark contrast to the sisters' subterranean fortress. He had them slaughter his weakest cattle and hang the meat inside. He told them to keep a fire going day and night, using cartonwood from the creek bed. He wanted results, and he wanted them fast. "They're just drying meat on a rock," he told his foreman. "How hard can it be? We'll flood the market. We'll run them out of business in a month." He could not have been more wrong. The failure of Finch's enterprise was swift and total. His smokehouse was a disaster of flawed principles. The wooden shed could not regulate temperature, it baked the meat 1 hour and chilled it the next. The hot, fast-burning cartonwood fire cooked the outer layers while leaving the inside raw. Within a week, the meat began to spoil. The smell of rot hung heavy over his ranch. He ordered his men to use more salt, but it only created a hard, inedible crust over the putrefying flesh. He lost dozens of cattle, his most valuable remaining asset, to an endeavor he fundamentally misunderstood. He was copying the visible action without grasping the invisible knowledge. He saw the smoke, but he did not understand the need for cool, dry air. He saw the fire, but did not know the specific resinous quality of bitter brush that acted as a preservative. He saw a product, but he could not replicate the process. His arrogance had met its match in the unyielding laws of physics and biology. He had believed money and manpower could conquer any problem. He learned they were useless without the correct information. The final blow came not from the sisters, but from his own wife. A quiet, pragmatic woman long overshadowed by her husband's bluster, she appeared on the Mesa one afternoon, alone. She did not look at Martha or Sarah. She looked at Tom, who stood near the entrance to the main house, rifle held loosely in his hands. "My husband," she began, her voice low and steady, "has lost his senses. He is ruined. But I have 2 ranch hands who have families. They have not been paid in 2 months. I have 4 horses and a wagon. I will trade them for enough meat to see those families through the winter." Sarah looked at Martha. Martha nodded. "The wagon and 2 horses will be sufficient," Sarah said. "Take the other 2 for your own use. Tom will help you load the meat." Finch's wife looked at them then, her eyes filled with a weary gratitude that was more damning to her husband than any curse. "Thank you," she said. "He never understood. He thought you were lucky it wasn't luck," Martha said, her voice devoid of triumph. It was preparation. Alastair Finch left the valley a month later. He sold his remaining land for a fraction of its worth and departed on the morning stage, leaving his wife to manage their affairs. He never came back. His name became a cautionary tale, a story told by old men in the town saloon about how a rich man's pride could be undone by 2 women on a worthless piece of land. The drought broke the following spring. It began with a soft, persistent drizzle that turned into a week of soaking rain. The valley floor drank it in, and within a month, a faint sheen of green returned to the exhausted pastures. The siege was over. The end of the drought did not end the business on Devil's Mesa. It transformed it. The desperate trade for survival evolved into a stable, respected enterprise. Mesa Provisions, as they were now known, no longer traded for potatoes and cloth. They traded for prime cattle, for lumber, for freight contracts. Their cured meat, once a food of last resort, was now prized by prospectors, surveyors, and army patrols for its longevity and quality. The sisters bought the 2 sections of land adjoining theirs, not for grazing, but to protect the watershed that fed their cisterns and to ensure a sustainable harvest of juniper and bitter brush. They hired the Miller boys, whose family they had fed during the worst years, as their first full-time employees. Sarah, once the skeptic, now ran the business with a sharp and prudent mind. She traveled to the city twice a year to negotiate contracts, her plain dress and direct manner a source of consternation and respect among the merchants she dealt with. Martha remained on the Mesa. She was the heart of the operation, the keeper of the knowledge. She oversaw the herds, the curing process, the delicate balance of the land itself. She spent her evenings not with ledgers, but with her father's journals, adding her own notes in the margins, observations on rainfall, on the health of the bitter brush, on new techniques for smoking. She was refining a science her father had only documented. Tom became their foreman, his loyalty absolute. He was a man remade, his past as a spy for a failed rancher buried under years of hard work and earned trust. He understood the rhythms of the Mesa as well as the sisters, and his quiet vigilance ensured their security and prosperity. Kaiser, the German shepherd, grew old. His muzzle turned grey, and his movements became stiff. He no longer patrolled the perimeter but spent his days sleeping in the sliver of sun that fell across the doorway of the main house. His presence was a constant, living marker of the time that had passed, from the first desperate days of excavation to these years of quiet abundance. The community's perception had completed its long arc. The people of prosperity no longer saw Devil's Mesa as a barren rock. They saw it as the anchor that had held the valley fast during the storm. They pointed it out to travelers. The Holloway sisters live up there, they would say. They saved this town. It was an overstatement, but it contained a core of truth. They had not saved the town with charity, but with a demonstration of what was possible. They had shown that resilience was not a matter of wealth or prime location, but of knowledge, foresight, and an unwillingness to bend to popular opinion. One autumn evening, years after Finch had gone, Martha sat with Tom by the fire. Kaiser lay at her feet, his breathing shallow. Sarah was away in Denver, securing a new contract with the Army. Martha was holding the first of her father's journals, the one containing his initial surveys of the region. She ran a hand over the worn leather cover. He saw things differently, she said, her voice soft. When everyone else saw a wasteland, he saw a system. He saw how the rock held the heat, how the plants had adapted to the lack of water, how the wind could be an ally instead of an enemy. Tom nodded, staring into the flames. He saw the truth of the place. He used to say that any piece of ground will tell you its secrets, if you listen long enough, Martha continued. She held the journal out to Tom. It's time you started listening for yourself. Tom looked from the book to her face, his expression one of surprise and profound gravity. He reached out and took it, his work-roughened hands holding the journal with a reverence usually reserved for scripture. It was not a gift of property or money. It was the transfer of a legacy. It was the knowledge, passing from one generation to the next. That night, Kaiser died peacefully in his sleep. They buried him the next morning on a high point of the Mesa overlooking the valley, marking the spot with a simple pile of stones. It was the end of an era. The founding generation of Devil's Mesa was passing. But the work, and the wisdom that informed it, would endure. The story of the Holloway sisters became a lesson, not just in survival, but in a different way of seeing the world. It taught that an apparent weakness can be a strength, that scarcity can breed ingenuity, and that true wealth is not in what you own, but in what you know. The laughter on the steps of the land office had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of a prosperous and resilient community, a community that had learned to look up to the high, flat rock they had once scorned, and see not a Devil's Mesa, but a sanctuary.